Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tea Time with Annabelle. So, today's episode is going to be a bit controversial. And the reason why I want to make this podcast is because recently a friend of mine asked me why some leaders or pastors that we both personally know have histories of harassing girls and women on and off for years, and yet today they are still holding positions of powers, still being leaders in churches. And that question just stayed with me for quite a while, and this is why I want to make this podcast today. So, I try to explain to my friend that the church system itself already provides a pretty solid foundation for different kinds of abuses to thrive. And on top of that, I don't think it's a coincidence that we keep seeing news and cases upon cases about different kinds of abuses, especially sexual abuses in different churches across the world and across denominations, because this is not just the Catholic Church, this is not just the Pope, it's also in evangelical churches. And guess what my friend said to me? They believe this has nothing to do with Christianity or the church. They actually think this has something to do with a person's bloodline and our human nature. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous, but if you're like me, you grew up in church, you were probably told the same thing. And if unfortunately you're one of the victims and your abusers happens to be one of the leaders in church, you were probably told that you just have to pray. You just have to let go and let God deal with your abuser's heart, and let God be the God of justice. Let God heal your heart so that you can forgive, let go, and finally move on. But here's the thing, if abuses are really all about our human nature being sinful, then we wouldn't see the same kind of abuses being repeated again and again everywhere across the world, across different churches, across denominations. And we wouldn't see the same kind of people being protected and then returning to their positions of power, returning to their positions of leadership, right? And that's because this is about cover up culture. And cover up culture can only thrive in a certain power structure. So, in this podcast, I will analyze first how cover up culture thrives in certain church spaces with a few research papers as my references. And then, secondly, I will expand on a certain power structure that created the cover up culture, how the power structure actually works, and what kind of elements act as a fuel for this power structure to stay in its place and continue to grow stronger and stronger. And then you cannot have a structure without its foundation, its roots, right? So finally, we will get to the root of what actually created all these abuses and chaos. Now let's get to part one, how cover-up culture thrives in certain church spaces. I'm going to use two examples, one from the Catholic Church and the other one from Evangelical Church. And I will prove to you how these two different denominations both share the same cover-up culture and the same power structure. Let's get to the Catholic Church first. Now, if you're a Catholic, I'm not attacking you as an individual person. We are discussing a certain power structure that works within church leadership. So, this research paper that I'm referencing is actually talking about a well documented case. It's on the news, you can go and search it up, about this ex cardinal named Theodore McCarrick. So, Theodore McCarrick was found guilty of sexually assaulting and molesting multiple teenagers and young adults. He coerced subordinates and exploited his status. And then the author of this research paper also told us that in order to help ourselves understand better how church culture, which sexual abuse occurs, ignored and cover up, we can actually look at the social network inside the church leadership. So if you want to talk about social networks within a church leadership, we have to look at this photo of how Catholic hierarchy works. So God is at the very top, then comes the Pope, the cardinals, the archbishops, the bishops, the priests, and finally the people at the very bottom. And this research paper found out that the social dynamics between the church leaders in the Catholic Church actually works this way. So, for example, the bishops might promote each other or promote the kind of people that they know are loyal to them to a higher position. So now we know in order to climb the Catholic hierarchy of ladder of power position, it's actually working through relationships with each other and like favors and loyalty. In other words, the people in leadership position in the Catholic Church, they are all friends with each other. I'm your protege, you're my friend, and we are all loyal to each other. So this, in a way, created their own exclusive boys club. And if one of us does something wrong, nobody is going to investigate openly. They might deal with it internally, but they will never make it public. Because let's say if you know some of my dirt and you expose me, I might want to take revenge and expose some of your dirt. So all these people in leadership position, in order to protect their own reputation and their career, they're just going to keep quiet. And that's the second layer of this power structure. Is all these people in leadership position just covering each other's bullshit? And that is them enabling abuse and creating a cover-up culture because they are creating a mutual web of protection. They're just protecting each other. Now, the third layer of this power structure is victim blaming and gaslighting. So, this McCarrick case, a lot of victims spoke up, and many people from the outside knew about what McCarrick did. But the institution, the church, just acted like nothing happened until the law officials captured McCarrick and the whole world, the news, know about what he did. And then people found out that the leaders around McCarrick actually knew about what he did for so long, but none of them did or say anything. That's because the church, the institution, the leaders only care about their own reputations and their career. Because imagine if one leader falls, right? The church image is going to be tainted because the church is going to look weak in the people's eyes, and the people are going to lose faith and trust in the church and the leaders. Then people are going to leave. When people leave, the church collapses. Now let's look at the evangelical church spaces. Evangelical churches don't have pope, they don't have cardinals or bishops. They claim to be non-hierarchical, but let's be honest, every organization would have their own hierarchy system. So let's look at this picture. In evangelical churches, God is at the very top, of course, and then you have the head pastor or the founding pastor. They will be the main voice and the image of the church. And then under them, you have the assistant pastors or the elders, and then the trusted leadership team, the worship team, the youth leaders. And these two groups, they are interchangeable. Okay, and all these leadership team or like assistant pastors, they will have their kids, right? And then all these kids, they grew up together in church since young, and then they are also being trained, to one day take over the higher leader position. Some of them also have dated each other before. So I will call these the inner circle, kind of similar to the Catholic leadership hierarchy, right? The exclusive club. And then under them, you have the church workers, the staffs, the congregation, and some volunteers for the missionary teams. For the evangelical church, I'm going to use the Bethel Church Shawn Bolz case as my example. Reason because, number one, this is the most recent case, and number two is because I personally know a few people that go to Redding, California Bethel School for their pastoral degree. So this is pretty close to home, personally. Now, I'm going to use Mike Winger's YouTube video that is almost 6 hours long, and the YouTube video name is called The Skeletons in Bethel's Closet Are Now Going to Speak, as my reference. Now, in this Mike Winger's YouTube video, he did a deep dive investigation and interviewed a lot of Shawn Bolz victims and got them to share their stories. And this is what I found out about Shawn Bolz. So Shawn Bolz apparently was a very famous and popular pastor. He was very well known for his prophecies, and he would prophesy over people's lives, telling them that, oh, you know what, I'm legit because I know the exact street name that you're staying at. Your house is this address. You have a daughter of how many years old, and you have a father that just passed away, and all these things. But apparently all of these so-called prophecies were actually just fake, because he has a team of people to data mine other people's like personal information online to gather all of them into a worksheet or like Excel sheet. So these people, when they attend his seminars and services, he would just like read off from the Excel sheet of like random information so that the congregation and the people would think that, whoa, this guy is legit. Other than that, Shawn Bolz also exposed himself. He walked around naked in front of people who back then were living and traveling with him for his ministry work. He also masturbated in his vehicle, sending unsolicited images of his private parts and just making very persistent sexual remarks. And he just told his victims that I'm a prophet, so I need to release myself. Now let's look at how the 3 layers of power structure that we talked about in the McCarrick case applies the same in this Bethel Church case. The first layer, remember, is the exclusive club. Now, Bethel Church also have their own exclusive club. They promote each other in the inner circle. Shawn Bolz was only that influential and popular because powerful leaders like Bill Johnson promoted him and platformed him. And then the second layer of this power structure, remember, is the leaders among themselves enabling abuses and creating the cover-up culture. So in this Mike Winger's video case, he found out that big leaders like Bill Johnson, like Randy Clark, and other inner circle powerful leaders apparently knew about Shawn Bolz being a red flag. And they even warned among themselves that Shawn Bolz was a fake. But they never let the public know about any of this. Right? And so this is them enabling abuses and creating the cover-up culture. And then the third layer of this power structure, which is gaslighting and victim blaming, Bethel Church didn't say anything to the public, right? They continued to platform and promoted Shawn Bolz, even promoted his books and even introduced him to other notable mega popular evangelical churches for Shawn Bolz to preach in those places. That's because this is how the Bethel Church, the church, keep their reputation and their money flowing. And when the victims finally speak up, they will get gaslighted. Right, I actually follow one of the victims of Shawn Bolz, and until today, she's still getting criticized by people. And even Mike Winger's legit concrete investigation with like concrete proof video, he still get criticized because Bethel is a big church, and people will want to defend a big church because the big church is a big brand. Bethel apologized eventually, yes, because they want to do some damage control. I'm sorry to say that, but I believe nothing's going to change because in the future, if similar things happen, the victims are still going to get victim blame and gaslighted the same. Because I believe that the victim blaming and gaslighting methods are actually the fuel, the essential elements that makes this power structure stay intact and continue to grow. So let's talk about the elements that works as the fuel for this power structure to stay intact. Remember, I said that the cover-up culture is the fruit, the power structure is the tree. In order for the tree to continue to grow and stay strong, you need elements around it to ensure the tree stays growing. So the elements that I'm talking about here is the gaslighting and victim blaming methods. What makes victim blaming or gaslighting method so effective in church spaces? Now we have to look at what we're taught in church when it comes to leaders and authorities. We often hear leaders in church talk about don't touch or slander God's anointed, and there are tons of Bible verses that talks about submitting to your authority. For example, Romans 13 verse 1, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. 1 Peter 2, submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every human authority. Hebrews 13, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority. Titus chapter 3 verse 1, remind the people to be subject to the rulers and authorities. So lots of authorities, lots of submission. When it comes to submitting to your authorities and is backed by Bible verses, it's very easy to shift the blame and the moral burden onto the people and onto the victims. But when it comes to ourselves and the people, we are taught in church that our flesh is weak and our heart is deceitful. And human nature is sinful, therefore your leaders are going to sin. Human nature is sinful, therefore wherever you go, that there are people are going to people are going to sin. And so it's not the church that hurt you, it's people that hurt you. God didn't hurt you, so you shouldn't leave church. And yeah, if you are still angry, you're the bitter one, you have unforgiveness in your heart, and that would turn into a resentment, and that's a sin. That's not good, that's bad. Do you see the pattern here? Every blame is on yourself, is onto you. Even without the victim blaming, the victims themselves would start blaming themselves. With all these teaching, we really have to question who really gets the protection here. So whether it's the Catholic Church or the Evangelical Church or any other Christian denominations, they all share the same teachings and doctrines to submit to authorities, and also tend to focus a lot on how personal individual self is very bad and therefore creating lots of shame, lots of fear, and lots of guilt. Now let's zoom out from the religious institutions cases, zoom out from Christianity and religion, and let me show you how this specific power structure can actually be applied in every other aspects of our lives. Starting from our family, the fathers or the elders being at the most top, the mother or elder siblings or aunts being, at the middle, being the enabler or mediator, and at the most bottom, the children, the most vulnerable and the dependents. And if we work at the workplace hierarchy triangle, you have the boss, the CEO, the founder at the very top, and then the manager or the HR being the middleman at the middle, and at the very bottom of the hierarchy, you have the employees, the contract worker, right, the interns. And finally, the government, the political power triangle. You have the political elites at the top, and the institutions, different institutions like DOJ, Department of Justice, media, the donors, and then different parties, left or right, but they are just creating illusions to make people believe that they actually have the freedom to choose. And at the very bottom is the citizens, the workers, right? And also the victims of political policies. Now, if you apply the same 3 layers of power structure that we talked about just now into these different aspects of our lives, you realize, holy shit, they all work the same. For example, the first layer, remember that all these leaders or people in power staying in this exclusive group where the loyalties among themselves is the key word, where they want to protect their own reputation, right? And if you apply this into the family setting, you will often hear that they are your elders anyway, just listen to them, even if they're wrong. And if you apply it into workplace, he's the boss. We just have to put up his bad behavior because he's the one that gives us our salary. In government, for example, Americans' politics, the evangelical Christians are backing Trump up and say that God can use anyone, even sinners. So God is using Donald Trump to help save America and drain the swamp. And then the second layer of the power structure, which is the middleman silencing the victims and enabling abuses and just creating cover-up culture. If applied in family setting, you often see the mother or the aunts wanting to keep the peace in the family, and they will just tell you to shut up, don't question anything, family comes first, right? And if applied in workspaces, the managers or the slightly higher up people might know, the boss's wrongdoings. The victims might speak up, but the managers might shut the victim out because they, being in the middle, being manager, they have the benefits, right? They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to lose the benefits of being a manager, right? Money. And if applied in government or politics, it's the same. They want to keep their status, their reputation, their job, to have their benefits, the money, so they just cover each other up and stay silent. And then finally, the third layer of the power structure, victim blaming, gaslighting, applied in family structure. You've heard this many times. He is your father. They are your grandfather. They sacrificed so much for you. How dare you be ungrateful and rude? Right? Applied in workplaces. Oh, you're just making a big deal out of nothing. You're being too sensitive. If you want to sue the company, fine. But do you want to be the one that caused people to lose their livelihoods and their jobs? Now you feel bad and you blame yourself and you don't say anything, you walk away, and the company continues to be abusive to other workers. And in government or politic settings, I'm going to use the Epstein case as an example. The predators' names are being protected, covered up, while the victims are being exposed. The victims' names, the victims' photos are being exposed. Now, can you see that how this power structure is not just in Catholic or evangelical church or Christianity church structure, it's in every aspect of our lives. Now, I want to be clear that I have nothing against hierarchy. There's nothing wrong with hierarchy itself because every group needs a way to organize. But this kind of specific hierarchy structure functions with power and authority at the top. Secrets just stays within the exclusive group at the top where they protect each other's reputation, and also expects the people at the bottom to hold the top up to protect the reputation at the top. And this is not a good hierarchy structure. This is a hierarchy of dominance where it focuses on protecting the top by sacrificing and punishing the people at the bottom. So the hierarchy of dominance, which is the power structure that I have been talking about, came from the seed of patriarchy. I know a lot of people, when they hear the word patriarchy, they're going to shut down and think that, oh, this is about men versus women, this is about gender wars again, but no. Let me explain. When I talk about patriarchy, I'm not talking about individual men. Okay, I'm going to reference this person's Samantha blog. She perfectly summed up what patriarchy means. Patriarchy is a social systems of power that have been developed for decades, centuries, and even millennia. For the last 5,000 to 6,000 years of complex state societies, men have been in the dominant positions of power. This is a fact. So, when men are the ones who are leading religious institutions, controlling and owning education systems, properties, writing laws, governing cities, and controlling women's bodies for thousands of years, then it makes sense that the systems that developed tend to reflect male dominance. Keyword dominance. I mentioned hierarchy of dominance, male dominance. Over time, those patterns then become reflected and continued in our today's laws, our culture, and social norms, and our religion. Therefore, women can also uphold the patriarchy. Right? So, this is not about men versus women. Women raised inside patriarchal systems can also enforce the same patriarchal values, right? Sometimes they would even enforce the patriarchal values and protect the patriarchy even more harshly and passionately. Think about those elders, your grandma, or even your mothers. They always care more about boys than girls. In Chinese, they call it 重男轻女. The reason why the hierarchy of dominance, aka the power structure that I have been talking about, is being reflected in every aspect of our lives, including the church structure, is because the way we understand power, strength, and control is through a very patriarchal lens. For example, let's talk about power. For a lot of us, the concept of power itself, to hold power means to have the ability to control. To hold power means you have someone beneath you or something beneath you so that you can command them to do something, to perform a certain way that you want them to. To hold power means you can dominate, right? For example, colonization. You need military conquest. It's a conquest. You need to conquer, right? In order to control lands and resources. And then colonizers, authoritarian leaders, they want control over money and labor. It's all about control. And they want to be above someone to control something that they believe is beneath them. And then having society standards or laws and policies to control women's body, teaching women that in order to be ladylike, you need to have a certain behavior, to submit, to be gentle, be obedient. Teaching women or young girls that to be ladylike, you need to have a certain appearance, you need to look a certain way. For example, you need to be wearing dresses, you need to be small and skinny, or even be hairless, right? If you add all of these together, women's body, hairless, small, skinny, wearing dresses, behaving a certain way, be submissive, be obedient, be gentle, it's all actually describing a childlike appearance and childlike behavior. And within hierarchy of dominance, children are not at the top. Therefore, children are not being protected. In fact, children are the most susceptible to harm and abuses. And because women are also taught to behave and look ladylike, which actually look childlike, women are also being more susceptible to harm and abuses under this hierarchy of dominance, aka patriarchy. Now, another example is the concept of strength. A lot of men, when they think about the word strength, most of them would tend to think about physical strength. The way they relate to being manly or being masculine, being strong, means you have to appear on the outside, appearance wise, be physically strong, having big muscles. And when it comes to emotions, you just don't be emotional because that's just not how a man should behave. Therefore, a lot of people believe that being emotional means you're weak. And for a lot of men, they don't want to seem and appear weak in front of their fellow peers, their fellow men, because they are going to lose respect. And that's the scariest thing that can happen to a man. So that's why you have the saying of men are more logical and women are more emotional. But that's just some patriarchal bullshit. Now, you have this hierarchy of dominance that values strength by suppressing emotion because you want to appear tough, right? Men are suppressing their emotions, and that actually harms them because men are human beings. Having emotion is just part of being human. So that's why the suicide rate within men is so high because they believe that they have to be strong by suppressing their emotions. So don't blame feminism. This is actually patriarchy's fault. Patriarchy set the standard for men to behave a certain way. When human beings are being disconnected from their emotions, their empathy, their softness, their intuition, their emotional honesty, they eventually lose themselves. And this is why so many men are becoming more and more apathetic, so callous, so emotionally stunted, and so violent. And because a lot of men believe these lies of the patriarchy that they have to behave and perform a certain way to appear powerful and strong, therefore they are forcing themselves to shut off the emotional part of themselves. That's why they are able to do violent things or do things that are actually against their own nature. And this applies to women as well. Like women believe that they have to appear a certain way to look strong and powerful. They are also able to just shut off the emotional part of themselves and just do things that would they believe would make them look strong and gain the respect of other people. That is why abuses happen everywhere around the world in every aspects of our lives, in churches, in workplace, and families. It's not because of human nature being sinful. This is about patriarchy. And patriarchy, this system, requires people, especially men, to strip off their humanity in order to perform patriarchy's own distorted version of masculinity and manliness so that we can appear somehow powerful and strong on the outside. But that's not the true definition of real power and strength. And since patriarchy is a system that rewards and protects the people at the top, it's very easy for the people at the bottom to believe that in order for them to feel worthy, to be worthy, they have to perform and behave a certain way. In family settings, you obey your parents or you get punished. So you learn to behave a certain way in order to earn the approval and love from your parents or your caretakers. So the child might grow up believing that in order to be loved, to be accepted, to be acknowledged, is to behave a certain way to please the parents. And this might create childhood trauma. And in school, you learn to obey your teachers, to do well and perform well in your grades, or you fail. And a lot of young people growing up believing that if they fail, if they get bad grades, it just means that they are stupid, right? But the education system is designed this way to make young people believe that their whole entire worth is based on their grades. That's why it generates a lot of anxiety and self-esteem issues. It's not designed to help young people discover their true strength, who they are themselves. So young people growing up not having a strong sense of self as well. When we finally get into workspaces, we believe that we have to prove our worth by being constantly productive. We have to please our boss or become disposable. We have to work and grind hard to be successful, to climb the ladder, to get to the top, so you don't get stuck at the bottom and get exploited. And in our religion, Christianity specifically, the Bible verse 1 Samuel talks about obedience is better than sacrifice. So even in our spirituality, something that's supposed to bring you emotional support and comfort and escape from the harsh reality of other aspects of your life that we talked about just now, actually operates the same way. It operates in the same system, the same power structure, and same hierarchy of dominance. Obey God, or you are sinful, rebellious, and you go to hell. No wonder so many of us feel exhausted and burnt out all the time because all these aspects of our lives under the patriarchy system requires us to strip away our humanity, to give up our agencies and our personhood in order to survive. Under this hierarchy of dominance, we are constantly learning that in order for us to feel loved, to feel belong, to feel safe, to feel that we are worthy, it has to be earned through our constant performance and our behavior. So, of course, all of us are struggling with so much insecurity. So many of us are filled with shame, guilt, so much fear, so much self blaming, filled with inadequacy, always thinking that we're not enough, not good enough, not smart enough, not rich enough, not successful enough, not beautiful enough, not powerful enough, just not enough. That's because the system is designed this way to make us feel like this. The system is designed to make us believe that we have to constantly perform, to do things a certain way, to behave a certain way. But at the end of the day, after performing so much, do we actually know ourselves? Do we actually know our true selves? Now, as we're reaching the end of this podcast, I want to bring the topic back to leadership and abuse. The reason why so many Christian leaders and powerful leaders around the world always get away with abuse is because the system that runs our world is designed to only reward dominance, control, and power. And this system is the patriarchy. Whether it's a church leader or a world leader or a CEO of a company, they all operate in the same logic of dominance. So when it comes to abuse, any kinds of abuse, it's always about power and entitlement, especially sexual abuse. When a church leader sexually abuses a child, it's not because of sexual temptation, it's because they believe the power that they have due to their leadership position gives them the power to have access to own anything that's below and under them. And when certain company dumps chemicals into the river, it's the same thing. It's the same theory, same concept, because they believe they have the power to do whatever they want. They feel entitled to the river. They think they own the river. So whether it's the destruction of the planet, exploitation of the poor, abuse of children and women, genocide, all of these things, all of these abuses, all boils down to patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism. Because these three systems, they empower and reinforce each other. If you think about it, none of these systems can actually operate without certain level of extraction, exploitation, violation, domination, and violence. And these are all forms of rape towards animals, towards nature, earth, towards children, women, towards life itself. And until we start seeing the system and question the system, we are just going to continue seeing abuses happening everywhere, again and again and again, in our families, in our church, in our society, in our government, in our workplaces. We need to stop seeing all these as separate problems because this is actually a system. We can keep believing the lies that we're told. We can keep thinking that, this is just how the world works. We can keep blaming on human nature and our individual sin. Or we can start seeing that this is a systems problem and we can work together to dismantle this system and stop this vicious cycle of abuse. Because think about it, the system is built and upheld by people. So we, the people, of course, have the power to build a completely different world, completely different system that actually would serve us. Finally, I'll end this podcast with a quote from the book The Creation of Patriarchy by Gerda Lerner. She said, "As long as both men and women regard the subordination of half the human race to other as natural, it is impossible to envision a society in which differences do not connote either dominance or subordination." We actually don't have to live this way. We just need better imagination. In fact, patriarchy has only existed 3 to 5% of our entire human history. But that's a topic for another episode. You've reached the end of this episode. All of the sources cited today are listed here and the description below. So feel free to dive into the research yourself. If you have any questions or thoughts, leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll see you in the next one.